Most of us measure a hard day in hours. Our guest today measures it in hundreds of miles. Greg Armstrong is an ultra marathon runner. He was on the United States national 24-hour running team. He's a Badwater finisher. He's a winner of the Vol State 500K, which is 314 miles on the open road, finished in just a little over 3 days, and so much more. But that's not why he's here today. For about two decades, Greg has taught biology and coached cross country at Friendship Christian School. He calls running a spiritual discipline, and he's put it to work. In 2015, he founded Run for Water, a nonprofit that's brought clean water and hope to communities in Uganda, Kenya, Honduras, Nicaragua, Haiti, and even in East Tennessee. On September 26th, he will host a Run for Water Ultra Festival. It's a day of racing supporting clean water initiatives around the world, featuring the premiere of a documentary that he's put together, Woven for Water, that was produced here in Lebanon. Today he's here to talk what it means to build and to be more than just an athlete or more than just a coach or more than just a leader. Welcome, Greg Armstrong. Doing this. This is awesome. I'm excited about it. And, the whole thing we wanted to try to look at with this is from coaching and then now being a parent of two boys and seeing it. And one of the things that's probably broadened my horizon was sitting in the stands and watching my boys play. It's a different perspective and the noise that's there and of what these kids are hearing, and then you hear, and it's a different, I remember thinking, wow, they're getting noise from this side of the floor, and then they're getting noise from this side of the floor, and then they're getting noise throughout the day, and there's just a lot of stuff there. And I started thinking, so how can we help develop purpose, some resilience, and then build intentionality, athletically, scholarly, spiritually? How can we keep it without, it doesn't have to be all or nothing, and sometimes we're wired and we do those things. So that's kind of how this all got started. And then, we kind of had some different guys on here with different backgrounds. And the thing I wanted to start with you with, well, one, tell us a little bit about your charity, Run for Water. I know you have a documentary coming up and you have the Ultra coming up in September as well. And I think that'll kind of set the stage for us.
Sure. Yeah, I guess just a little bit of background. I've always been, interested in sports and athletics. I mean, that's always been just kind of a passion of mine, and growing up in I guess the 80s and the 90s, um, I think that's why I'm really passionate about this topic is because I think so much of my identity as a young man, as a young Christian man was wrapped up in my performance. And unfortunately, I had a lot of coaches that used shame, guilt, and fear to try to get me to be a better athlete, and so that became my own self-talk. And so you had this idea is like if I can't be the best, if I'm not going to win, then my self-esteem would decrease. And I've always been a runner. I played tennis in high school and played basketball. I enjoyed basketball and tennis and some of those team sports a lot more. I played little league baseball. But as I've gotten older, running has always been just something I was a little bit more gifted at. So I've always been a runner. I've always ran. My dad was a part of that late 70s, early 80s with the Nike waffles, go out and
Okay.
run 2 miles. And I remember getting up I was 5 years old. I'd watch him put on his Nike shoes to go run his 2 miles. And finally he let me ride my bike with him. And then I would get to run with him. So, but running, just as I was ingrained was so much about you got to win, you got to do better. And so, I kind of tell this kind of story that, I remember at Middle Tennessee Christian School and elementary school, we'd have these races and I was always second to Anthony. And then I transferred schools and to a public school. And I thought maybe I could be the fastest runner there. But there was a girl in the sixth grade that was always faster than me. And then when I was at Riverdale High School in Murfreesboro, I was like second or third on the cross country team. I transferred back to Middle Tennessee Christian School to graduate. And for a while, I was the fastest because it's a small Christian school. And, I wanted to be the best. And my senior year, I was running in 10th spot in cross country to qualify for the state championship. They take the top 10 in the region. And a sophomore from my own team edged me out in the last tenth of a mile. and I didn't qualify. And, and at that point it was all about me and all about me being competitive. And I was super hard on myself. And because of my own, because I was so focused on me, I could not have any joy for my friend and him qualifying. Long story short, fast forward all the way from, when I graduated high school in 1992 to 2009, I still was running. I had this kind of like call an epiphany or whatever, sitting down looking at a devotional with God, and I was just thinking, how can I use the things that I'm gifted at and the things that I'm passionate about to glorify God and not myself? And that was this huge like watershed moment. And then that's when I had this idea that I'm going to run for water, instead of running. And, and I still, but that's the beauty of it. That was my objective, is trying to channeling my sport and my love of running for the water crisis in our world. Is something I was passionate about. I was already doing some water ministry in southern Honduras. So I started Run for Water to really, from a personal standpoint. It was just so I could channel all of my runs, and when I would go do these training runs, I would pray about individuals that lacked clean water. I would use any success I had as a platform, and you call it, you know, the providence of God or whatever. But I didn't even realize this for 5 years later. 2009, October of 2009 is when I had this idea to start Run for Water. And at that point, I was 35 years old. Um, 2 weeks after that, I won my very first race ever. Like, it was a 10K race. It wasn't a big race, but, and then, you know, and to me, it's such a powerful testimony. Whenever I gave up the pursuit of self glory, it's like, I think it was that moment that God was like, okay, now you're ready for some success.
Now you're
And,
free to run.
now I'm free to run. And then like, and that was like, I was able to qualify for the U.S. Ultra team, and I found like lots of success in the ultra running world. And, but it was so liberating at that point, because I didn't have the pressure, and I didn't, if I didn't do well at a race, I didn't, just shame myself the way I used to. And so, yeah, so that's my nonprofit that started in 2010, and it has just grown. Basically, to sum up, we raise awareness and provide solutions for the water crisis in our world, primarily from a humanitarian standpoint, but there's also an overlap with the environmental water crisis. So we will do some things that are more environmental than humanitarian, but currently we're very active in Nicaragua, Mexico, Uganda, Tanzania, and Appalachia. We have I would say over 50% of our time is spent here in the United States helping families in Appalachia have access to clean water. A lot of people don't realize that we have children that are still drinking from contaminated creeks. And so, yeah, the documentary is coming out September 26th, which we're having a running festival. It's kind of something for ultra runners, a 5K. We'll have 5K events. We'll have 1 mile runs. You can come out and walk. And then we're going to premiere our documentary. Our documentary features Mexico, Tanzania, and Hancock County, Tennessee, which are three, it's kind of but it's woven by water. It's showing how we're all connected to the creation through water, and we're all connected to one another through water, and how that basic, necessity of life can build beautiful relationships.
It's wild that that's just 3 hours away,
Yeah.
that there's the same issues that you see in third world countries.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
You said something that struck, and it was a note that I'd already made, and I don't know who came up with this, but we've all seen it, that with our mindset and beliefs lead to our thoughts, which lead to our words, actions. Enough of the actions become habits. Those habits become our character, or if it's a business or culture, ultimately leads to our destiny. So back to that mindset that you talked about having, which can lead to negative self-talk if that mindset isn't right. Because I've had the same thing as a player when I was in high school and stuff, but more recently as a coach. It would be tough at times. You lose on Saturday to go to church on Sunday and think about, well, what a loser. It shows how selfish I am thinking about that. That's what everybody in the building is thinking about, me losing or being a loser, which is far from the truth. But it starts with that unrealistic. What are some thoughts? I know you've done a lot of research that we'll get to as well about how do we attack or how do we start with the mindset that'll get
Yeah,
to the self-talk?
for sure. And that's where, it's something I'm extremely passionate about because it's something it's a journey I've gone through personally in my own athletic, you know, um, pursuits. But I've been a campus minister at Friendship Christian School for, you know, 22 years now. And I'm just being honest. And if I look through the whole scope of my entire life, the people that I went to high school with, the students that I've worked with for 20 years, those that are extremely talented and gifted athletically. This isn't just this isn't every case, but the majority of those students and young people that are really gifted and talented athletically, it comes at a cost to their emotional and their spiritual well-being. And I think that's in part of human it's part of our human nature, right? We focus on these physical things that aren't, and Jesus is constantly telling us to think about the eternal things. But I think it's also an indictment on us as leaders, because you look at from our generation, if without intentionality, like you said, we're going to default and coach and mentor kids the way we were mentored. And I now love my coaches. I don't mean this in a negative sense. They're a product of how they were taught, right? But that's where the gospel changes everything. And if we are truly serious about our faith, we have to change that cycle. And what we do, we end up modeling what is successful in the world. But if the gospel teaches us anything, we have to find a different way to do it. And so I guess to answer your question with nuts and bolts, I think it's Philippians chapter 4. I talk about this all the time. The one of the greatest billboard scriptures is 4 verse 13. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But I'm not saying it's wrong to use that to run a marathon. I've seen that on the back of so many running shirts, or guys will quote that before they go out for the football game, but that is not the context of that scripture. The context of that scripture is how we change our mindset, because Philippians 4 begins with this idea of don't be anxious about anything. And Paul's in a jail cell. He says, but through everything in prayer, make your requests made known to God with a thankful heart, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. And here's to me, it's my favorite verse in the Bible. And then verse 11, which sets up verse 13, it says, I have learned to be content. That peace of mind is not and that is so significant. We sit at the feet of Jesus and we learn to be content. It's a learned trait, and thank the Lord that it is. We think contentment is going to come when we win the game. We think that we'll be content if we get the state championship, but it is a learned skill. And then that sets up verse 13, which says, I can do all things. And really, the better context of that for us as coaches and players is I can win the game, I can lose the game, and I can still have joy in my heart because my strength comes from Jesus. My strength does not come from me being a victorious coach. Does that?
We just Absolutely. We just did a study at Brentwood Hills, and I spoke on it on Philippians. But when I spoke, I talked about Paul kind of had 4 mindsets that you can kind of summarize, and each chapter being a little different mindset that he had. But he had the ability, the learned ability, and through the Holy Spirit, to focus on his position in Christ, not the conditions around him. And when we flip it, like you're talking about, then that's when it becomes about me and not about the modeling Christ or the love of Christ there. The other thing that jumps out at me, and it's part of the Philippians, but it comes from Proverbs, is 4:23, when it says, above all else, guard your hearts. And, I think I answered my own question a little bit, that for us to do this, the intentionality has to be to guard our hearts. Well, then what's going into our hearts? We have to figure out what these filters are, what these distractions are coming through. And as coaches, not be part of the distraction, or parents, or whatever. Other thoughts on that? I had a couple other questions to follow up with that. You've done a lot of research on, I guess, like the philosophy of youth sports, youth programs. Uh, I've seen that. I've as a college coach been on the other end of what that looks like in a travel ball or an AAU, and it's wild, almost a different type of infrastructure that's running right there, and everything is built around those games about individual performance. And that seems to be the baseline for where youth sports are right now. And that may be my cynical opinion, but you've done more research. If you could expand on that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's, there's so much that has changed, and I think that what I think we've seen, and you probably see this more than I do, the business side of it, with all of your travel ball and then all of the just because it's so much of it is a money grab, and so you're giving students this like false sense of value as a player because that's going to produce more money. Like, okay, if a 7-year-old goes to some travel ball, it's in their best travel ball, group. It's in that organization's best interest to convince the parents that this 7-year-old is going to be a phenomenal athlete if you invest and you do this and you do that and you do more.
Or they won't be seen. They won't be seen. You won't be able to get the opportunities and part of the cog in the wheel of the machine. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think that's one factor in all of it. This morning we had cross country practice with my runners, and this is my approach. And I'm out there running with them, and I'm out there yelling at them. I'm like, "Come on, guys, you pick it up," and I'm pushing them I'm not sacrificing, this the motivating factor whatsoever, but at the end of practice, I give them a card, and they write down their goals for cross country. And then on the backside, I have them write down some of their spiritual and their emotional goals. And then, like the devotional that we had today, was looking at the holistic self. And that's the part that I really want to talk about and that's where my research is going. Is as coaches, I think we are doing our student athletes a disservice if we are not looking at their whole being. And if you want to simplify it, you could take spirit, mind, and body. And I think for us as believers, it is their spirit, their spiritual side, their soul that is most important, because that's what is eternal. And second to that is their mindset. And third is their physical. But I think so often we flip that, right? We are so focused on the physical. And when I say physical, their accomplishments athletically. So youth sports is no longer a means to an end. And I mean, youth sports is an amazing, you know, gateway to help a young person grow spiritually and mentally along with physically, but it has to be with intentionality. We've made it the end all be all, not a means to an end. The end result is not really the state championship, it's to have a holistic, functioning, confident young person that can go out and be a great citizen in the world and from a faith perspective contribute to the kingdom of God. And I just wanted to be clear with my athletes. I tell them so on a regular basis. As your coach, that's what I care about most is your spiritual being. Your mental health is second. Your physical is third. And so I just think we need to. Here's another. Anytime I talk to parents, and this is what I was gonna, if I was gonna be there in person in our meeting, if you have an audience, I was gonna ask people how many are parents, how many have kids, and I think coaches need to hear this too. When your child was born, for those of us that are parents, we can remember the first time our eyes looked deeply into the eyes of our newborn child. And I asked those parents, or I'd ask those coaches, was your child valuable to you at that point? And of course the answer is absolutely. And I'm like, really? I was like, you I bet they couldn't get a 5 on the ACT. They couldn't hit a home run. They could do nothing. Why were they so valuable to you? And then the obvious answer is because they're mine. And I think, and I don't doubt, I think so many coaches they value their players, but sometimes the messages that we send to our players is you're only valuable to me when you are successful. And that's where my research, and this is, you could say this is my opinion, and yeah, it is my opinion. For us as Christian coaches, um, and really a lot of even the secular research is bearing this out. It is completely out of bounds for us to use shame, guilt, and fear to motivate our athletes. And I mean, and I know that I know that probably would land. I know there's a lot of coaches. If we were in a big, there's a lot of coaches that would be like, no. Now, is it effective? Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yep.
Shame, guilt, and fear are highly effective. But for if we want to coach and we want to be a Christian coach, and if I don't think that that means that we have to compromise success, but if it does, then so be it. And that's the hard part that coaches, we want our cake and eat it too. And I think so many times we're taking cues from the world and from the secular success for athletes, and we're trying to model that. I love watching the ESPN 30 for 30, right? You look at The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, and this is what I tell, and I think this is so important for us when we talk to our athletes. Michael Jordan, I mean, I know it's LeBron or Jordan, who's the greatest. If he's not the greatest, he's close, right? As far as a basketball player, phenomenal. Have you watched the I Hate Laettner, the Christian Laettner documentary?
Especially
All
being
of
from
those,
Kentucky. Yep.
right? All of those, but I mean, C plus humans at best. No offense. I mean, at best, and they were cruel. They were not kind. And you could make an argument. The reason they were, and I just watched the one on Tom Brady. You know, like what's and his own inner struggle. Like I don't, their mental health was not that because they were so focused on winning. That was the only thing that was important to them. Right. And no judgment on them. I don't know exactly where their faith is. I'm not trying to, my point is for us as Christians, like I guess that's kind of my point. Like I think it's so important that we're not sending those same messages because at the end of the day, I think we have failed our student athletes if they win 4 state championships when we have them in high school, but they're only a C plus human when they go out into the world.
Absolutely. And that's the frustrating thing for me personally, coaching, because I catch myself knowing better and still getting caught up in the world's way of doing it. And and I'll be honest, what has helped is watching other people coach my boys. And you go, well, because what you see them doing is what you've seen me do, and think that's not the right way to do that. You wouldn't, and we joke all the time, and that we would not say that. And we were talking about this. I've coached collegiately a lot, and talking to different assistants, and not just from coach to player, but also you see it amongst staffs that in athletics it's acceptable to speak to people in ways that you would be fired in a corporate world, much less being right or wrong. There's no way it would be tolerated. But then to go as Christians, there's no way we should be. That's not motivating my employees any better than it is motivating our players. And then that trickles. There's no way then to model that for our players because they see it amongst the staff.
Right. And to your point, my specific research that I did was on bullying, harassment, and hazing in youth sports. And it's so fascinating that not that we've totally rid the classroom or the school setting of bullying, harassment, and hazing, but we have an absolute zero tolerance. Like there's like if there is any type of bullying or harassment in a school setting, like the education setting, academic setting, it is addressed. But in youth sports, oh no, there's this culture of silence, right? And it's that idea of we allow a little bit of that, and sometimes it's actually parents that are, like you said, saying really inappropriate things. And as a campus minister, there's times that I have talked to children. I'll never forget a seventh. Well, she was she was a junior in high school, a really successful softball player. I think she was a part of our. I think they won a state championship when she was in high school. I remember her telling me when she was in seventh grade, she never the ride home after a softball game was the most terrifying thing with her dad. She said, and it didn't matter if I hit two home runs. It didn't matter how well I thought I played. If I thought I played good, and and sometimes he was, but she was just like, and I was just terrified. And I had daughters that my daughter, for instance, was never really not incredibly athletic, but thought she wanted to play softball in the sixth grade because some of her friends were playing. Never touched a ball of any kind. And it was too late. I mean, she tried to start in the sixth grade and she would come home from each practice just crying her eyes out because her self-esteem was plummeting because she wasn't as talented as these other girls that have been playing softball since they were 4 or 5. And I remember setting her down and I said, Lily Grace, it's like, I really don't care what kind of softball player you are. I really don't. It's not that important to me. And when I tell that story to my high school students, I'll tell them that scenario to try to help them. And they look at me as like, why would you tell your daughter that? It's like, because I wanted her to know that her worth as a father had nothing to do with her athletic performance.
I think you would get the same look from a lot of parents right now. I
Right.
can't believe you told her that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just
And
need to figure it out. We got to push you more. There's going to be more things we got to do to get you to that point, as
Right.
opposed to we'll do whatever, but
Right.
I don't care.
Yep. I'll give, and here's what I know some of our coaches and some of our parents are saying, well, you're not helping them build resilience and you're not helping them. Right. Okay. Well, there's there's other ways. And I think Romans chapter 5, like I tell my students this all the time, my students and my athletes, we were created to do hard things. We glory in our afflictions because afflictions build perseverance, perseverance build character, and character hope. And I think for us, as long as that's our intentionality, I'm not saying we're soft or we're easy on our like. I mean, you come out to one of my cross country practices. I'm not easy on my players, and I tell them, I said, you've disgraced your team and you've disgraced the gifts that God has given you if you're not pushing yourself and giving 110%. I mean, does that make sense? I'm not being soft. It doesn't mean we have to be soft. It doesn't mean that we don't have expectations on them. But I think ultimately we have to, as coaches, it's like we have to change our mindset before we change our behaviors. And so that to me, and maybe this was one of the takeaways, I would challenge any coach, especially a coach that that has a faith and believes in the gospel of Jesus, that what makes your student athletes valuable to you. Because I would tell, I coached a young girl for 10 years in cross country. She won the state championship. She's one of the most talented athletes that I've ever coached. And she would get so nervous at the beginning of every race. And we would pray. And I would tell her at the beginning of a race, I said, it doesn't, if you get first place, second place, or dead last, God will love you the same. And I think for us as coaches, we have to believe that. And if we believe that, that's the first step. I said in the second step, we have to tell our athletes that.
They have to hear it.
They have to hear it. And I will say, I coach cross country. I do. I really I empathize with our basketball coaches and our football coaches and our baseball coaches, because the pressure that they're under and the expectations that you may have, coach, from parents and administration, is you've got, does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
my sport is it. I, if we have a good season or bad season in cross country, my job is not on the line. I'm not even sure anybody notices. And that
But
goes back.
that goes exactly back to your point of we've got the wrong set points that we're trying to measure up to right there. That we're trying to live by these set points that are not, there are world set points, they're not spiritual set points for us, which leads to pressures that we don't need because they're not taking us in the direction that we should be going anyway, if I'm hearing you right on
Yes.
that.
100%.
I had a chance a few years ago to go over to Vanderbilt and watch baseball practice. And Coach Corbin always does a team meeting before. And it was the last homestand of the season. And they were playing Florida, and they were right in the thick of winning an SEC title. So this series meant a lot. It's also senior night, so all the family was coming in. And he told the guys, he said, hey, you got a lot going on this week. There's a lot of opportunity for distractions. He said, but I want the closer you get to our facility, I want your anxiety level to go down. This is your safe place here. He said, so when you get here, all the distractions of the world should go away. All the moms wanting tickets, girlfriends, whatever it is. You got each other, we got this, anxiety should go down. Anyway, he walked them through, and I was thinking that, and I think about that a lot because to me, it's usually the other way. The closer I get to the gym, the higher my anxiety level is getting. And that's not, because our play, our coaching, I would think should be a worship.
Right.
And if you took the same setting and my anxiety was getting higher and higher as I went to worship on Sunday, that would be mind-blowing. But one's not different than the other, I don't think. We're both given things and we're both offering these up for God. And in order to do that, I can't be anxious about those things from a worldly standpoint. Is that, are we on the same path? Do you think that's what you're saying?
Oh yeah, I think for sure. I think that we have to, and I really think for us as coaches, we have to truly ask ourselves, how important is winning? And it can be really important, but it is not the most important thing.
Right.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
and what are we willing to sacrifice? And I mean, if we're really honest with ourselves, when it's just us alone with God, what would you be willing to sacrifice to get that state championship or to win that stamp? And I think a lot of coaches would, if they were being truly honest, would you be willing to sacrifice the mental and spiritual health of all your players to get a state championship?
Well, we see it, that the answer is yes to that. And I'm not saying to everybody, but a blanket statement. But I've been in college athletics enough to know that, and you'll hear this from a variety of head coaches. Hey, you're not going to get my lights turned off because of how you play. Your job is to make sure I keep my lights turned on. Your job is to make sure I get my bills paid. Well, no, that's really not their job. But that now you're talking about adding those layers of anxiety on top of that. There's no way that's beneficial for their health or ours.
And also too, some of it I think is age appropriateness. Again, I'm not in the college realm, but you take a 21-year-old college student, they may be able to handle a little bit more, it's going to change but I'm talking, I see middle school kids, kids in the 6th grade that are being like, you're using these same, right? And you're trying to use these methods that work for professional athletes with a 12-year-old. Like, and the way that lands on them is, I had a good friend, one of my former students was a collegiate athlete in softball. And I don't know if this is commonplace everywhere, but at Trevecca, she said that, and I may have it a little off, but she said, at least with her softball team, and I understood it with all of their collegiate players, their senior year, they had to go through counseling because what Trevecca had found that these college athletes that have been playing ball and it's been their identity since they were 5 years old, and this is it. This is the last year, like emotionally. And I mean, hats off to Trevecca that they're seeing, but that's kind of sad that
That it gets to that point.
that it gets to that point that a 22-year-old has to go through therapy because they're not going to play softball. And to me, that's such a it's such a indication of the gospel. It's temporary, right? I mean, especially when you look at our student athletes, like most of them, how many are going to, the stats, how many are going to play post college professional sports? And so we do all of this for maybe at best that it's over when they're 22 and you start at such a young age. And what does life look like to them at their 22? Or, I mean, we've all seen, I mean, I see this every year. I see some of my student athletes, they tear their ACL or they have some injury that knocks them out for a year. I mean, they legitimately need counseling. because that is so wrapped up in their identity and they don't feel like they have anything to offer.
Well, and the irony is that the ones that make it to the NFL or the NBA or whatever it is, you're not going to play past early 30s probably.
Right.
And then they have the same exact issue, even though they have the money or whatever else, but they not all, but many have lost their identity because they can no longer, they talk about compete. I can't compete anymore, so I've got nothing else to show for. And so through your research, what are some practical ways that you're trying to implement, or how would you guide coaches and parents right now to go, okay, if they agree, like we need to make some changes? What are some practical ways to know that we've got to shift our mindset?
Sure. And I guess just to clarify, because I know I always it frustrates me when people say, well, I've done some research when they've just Googled on AI. Like, just to clarify, I just finished my EDS in school counseling, educational specialist. It's like a second master's, but with that, I had to do a pretty significant capstone project, and the research. Lots of articles, and had to create this document. As far as I think obviously just intentionality. I know that's kind of cliche, but I think talking to our coaches and our parents, but also having policies. I think every institution, that was part of the article that I created, was a student athlete handbook. And in my research, our school, Friendship Christian School, is a part of an accreditation, NCS accreditation. There's 50 private Christian schools that are a part of that accreditation. And in my research, only one of those schools, Lipscomb Academy, was the only school that had a standalone student athlete handbook that outlined the expectations of athletes, um, parents in the stands, and coaches, and it kind of outlined this culture of what the expectations and the policies of how they were going to conduct themselves as athletes, coaches, and parents. And so, yes, I think having more meetings and professional development with coaches to help them understand, the negative effects of shame, guilt, and fear on young student athletes, but also beyond that, having some policies and some expectations that are laid out and communicated to at all of your, like, I'm hoping that our school will adopt this at all of our team meetings with parents at the beginning of the season. And if it means that they sign, this policies and expectations. And I think, to your point, like, sometimes the way parents act in the stands and the things that they say, um, also is that voice that lands on the
Oh, yeah.
kid. And so I think those are two things. I think more professional development and parent meetings, and just communicating, why we shouldn't speak to our young people or coach them in these ways. But I think beyond that, having policies, written policies and expectations, to present to everybody is important.
Which would also, just working backwards, if you're going to have that in the athletic department, it can't be standalone. That has to start at the top of the school or the top of the organization. And this is how we do everything here along that line.
Exactly.
Um, what about for parents? You wouldn't necessarily have a handbook, but what from the research you've done and coaching and being an athlete and having kids, what are some some guides you think that would help parents make this mindset shift as well?
Sure.
And I guess let me give you one. This is one.
Yeah.
As a coach, I never tried to coach. I was intentional about never, when I dropped my boys off, if you were the coach, not me. I let whatever happen, whatever. I made it intentional to not talk about it in the car when we got back. Now, if they want to ask a question or whatever, now it was hard sometimes because just the natural part of it, you want to talk about it. But those were things I knew I had to set boundaries for me. And I think the boys have done a pretty good job of handling that throughout. And I guess that's what I was thinking about, maybe some practical things that parents could take with them.
Yeah. I think I think it's similar to what we've talked about is having those parent meetings and laying out what the expectations are for parents and holding parents accountable. I think sometimes we're so afraid to hold parents accountable and I think as coaches, we're always kind of seems like we're the whipping post for the parents that but I think it we have to be proactive and not reactive. I think laying out those expectations and I do think that in that student athlete handbook, I think there can be a section for parents to sign. This is how I'm going to conduct myself. Like in my research of different student athlete handbooks, like there was one that if a parent or an athlete is going to confront a coach about their playing time or something they were unhappy with, that number one, the student athlete has to have the conversation with the coach first. You have to let at least 24 hours elapse from the end. You can't approach a coach right after a game. You have to let 24 hours go, and the parent cannot approach the coach until the student has had it right. And so like that gives guidelines for the student. So like and that's proactive, right? So after the basketball game, if the parent is coming after you, it's like, well, come my son, why didn't you put like, hey, remember our policy? First off, your son's got to come talk to me first. And he needs to wait 24 hours. We need to let all this cool down. You have a policy that you can remind the parent of. And obviously, administration is there to back that up. And so, and, each school and each program can kind of create that together with, with collaboration, of what they think best fits their culture. I think the other thing to add on while we're on that is locker room, and how things are conducted in the locker rooms. Because if you look at, and this is where administration will get their attention really quick. When you look at, our world of legality, some of the things that take place in our locker rooms that can get us on the front page of the news, and that's where the hazing sometimes is allowed. And I think we need to do a better job of that as well.
Greg, we got just a couple more minutes right here. Anything you would like to close with or that's on your heart you'd want to share? Assuming it was we'll have parents and coaches and administrators all on this webinar.
Yeah. Again, I think just kind of reiterating that holistic growth and using youth sports to really build, the foundation of a young person's entire character, and just maybe understanding that really youth sports is such a temporary thing. It can be a very powerful tool to build that character, and to help a young person. I mean, we can use that to help them to be more mentally strong, to be more resilient. We can help that to build for them to actually help their mental health and their emotional well-being and their spiritual well-being. But we just got to make sure that we're not doing the opposite. We got to make sure that our quest for athletic excellence is not coming at the cost of their emotional, mental, and spiritual health. And if we're always cognizant of that, and sometimes it's a case by case basis, right? I mean, you have to take the child on the individual level. Like, and we can, I certainly don't want this. I know it seems like we've been very negative. I mean, we can all state some amazing testimonies of how youth sports has really helped a child grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
We
It's
just
the
have to do
unintended consequences of a lot of things that we do have led to things that we may not see.
exactly
They're done playing for us, and we don't see the subtle things that happen over the last 5 years or 10 years or whatever. Yeah.
right, exactly.
Well, Coach, I appreciate it. We're going to wrap up right here. We will have your email, and if that's all right, and your website on there. We're excited about I'm looking forward to running in September in the
Yeah.
event, in the ultra part, and the documentary. And we look forward to doing some things where we can try to bring more attention some more intentionality to youth sports or collegiate sports or anything that we can to help coaches and players and parents. And I just appreciate you being on here to help us with that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. I really appreciate the initiative of what you're doing here. It's really something I'm passionate about.
Well, we look forward to it, and we'll be in touch.
All
Thank
right.
you, Coach.
Thanks, Coach.
Bye. See you.